Anyway, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have the distinguished pleasure of emceeing a panel today on our wonderful guest here today. It seems like you can't go more than a couple minutes without the world referencing ChatGPT, Gen AI, prompts, prompt engineering, and what it would seem to be the end of the world. With its growth to over 100 million users in just 5 weeks, previous record was TikTok with 9 months, ChatGPT has really shown us the impact of it. The milestone of combining LLMs and chatbots together has really brought AI to the masses. But like any tech that's white hot, it's gonna cool. I think we know that. And where does that leave businesses in their adoption and commercialization of this trend? It's definitely here to stay. That's a hard yes. But how it's gonna evolve and integrate into the real world of daily competitor, customer, user, employee behavior, that's what we're here to talk about today. On the stage with me, I have Anand Nimkar. Maybe you can just throw up your hands so we know who you are. Miguel Mendez and Preeti Shivpuri. I'm really excited about this because these 3 Deloitte representatives from the Omni balance out actually, I think it was an interesting trend, which is how to get started, how to scale it, and then how to make sure it actually works and does what we want it to do from a trustworthy standpoint. So, without further ado, let's get started, because you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to our wonderful Deloitte colleagues. So, welcome everybody. Great to have you here. Anand, let's start with you, just because we're going to start with how we get started.
Okay.
How far are we from achieving the widespread adoption and implementation of Gen AI do you think we are? And what are the technical, ethical, and regulatory challenges that need to be overcome before we can purely leverage it? So how far are we from it actually being real?
I think with any new technology, enterprise is generally slow to adopt. It depends on the industry, right? So financial services, for example, there's additional regulatory oversight in that industry, so they're going to be more careful with how they roll it out. The focus has been mostly narrow use cases, right? So how can we deploy generative AI in the call center? And what can it do for our employees? A lot of the focus, especially over the past 6 months, has been an employee augmentation, where a human is in the loop, as opposed to customer facing. And the reason for that is risk, right? Like you're going to be putting in applications that are non-deterministic, and the outputs cannot be managed or controlled. How do you even evaluate the outputs? I know a lot of this is there's engineering efforts in place across the field of generative AI, trying to determine the optimal way to evaluate, right? Okay. What are the correct prompt chains? What are the right architectures that we should use so the models can be assured to not hallucinate, right? So I would say that enterprise has a higher standard. And I think the second part of your question was around regulation. Yeah. I think regulation will focus on, in the short term, it will be focused on the data itself, so the source data and whether it's biased or not. And how is that data being used? The system design, is it an appropriate design of the system? How was it architected? How was it implemented? And there will be controls in place. So if you look at the AI Data Act, as part of Bill C-27 in Canada, they actually list out a number of potential controls that you need to implement to actually scale these out, right? So I think as time progresses, one, enterprise will be more ambitious with the types of use cases they'll focus on, and regulation will also catch up to ensure that the right controls are in place.
Great. Anyone from the panel want to jump in on anything like that?
I think that was a...
Sounds good?
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Maybe I can just...
Yeah, I'm just wondering maybe on the ethical side. Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the trustworthiness.
So as Anand rightly so suggested, I think first thing is where can businesses start? I think it's identifying those use cases. And with different sectors, there's going to be different use cases that are going to be leveraged. And we are already seeing, as Anand mentioned, it's about call center, whether it is in financial industry space. I also feel that there are a lot of good use cases that can come from different sectors, which we haven't even thought about. And it's a matter of just extending the level of understanding of what could be done with AI, and that's where healthcare sector, like we are already seeing there's lots that can be done with AI, where health sector can really benefit, but with the right measures, and we'll talk about that in a little while. I also feel that regulations are right now more geared towards certain aspects of privacy-related concerns, because just because organizations have my data doesn't mean that they can use it the way that they want it. So it's more around privacy-related regulations, which is where C27, as Anand mentioned, like the ADA Act, or in the EU AI Act is also focusing on that, which is piggybacking on the GDPR. So personal consent, privacy consent is more seen in those areas, which is going to be the norm, but it's going to quickly scale or quickly move towards some of the other civil society, human rights. Like these regulations are also trying to up their regulatory requirements just because of the outreach and the impact that it is seen in the industry. So just having a more holistic mindset as you guys are using AI, just have a complete mindset of how can it be used from a use case perspective in the context where it is being applied to, and for that context, what are the necessary regulations that are already existing that needs to be kept in mind. I think that's a good way for a business to get started on this.
And just to jump on that as well, like I kind of think of it as like as we were talking about the call center, as Anand mentioned, it's something that like people you need to kind of understand these things. So I think it's an easy use case to kind of grab onto, but of course we all know that there's so much other things out there. I was going to mention that I always think of it as sort of like when computers were kind of first introduced to the environment. There was some very obvious places that it can make things faster, better. But it wasn't sort of trapped there. Eventually, over time, it was introduced to the whole organization. So I think right now there's a lot obviously focused on the IT sort of side of it. I mean, obviously I'm looking at the scaling kind of portion, but I think it's important to get people using it and really seeing where it can be used. Same with computers. Like now we can imagine a lot of these departments being computer focused. But back then it was, probably just starting with like the accounting department, let's say, and nobody thought of using it in all these other ways. So I think just getting people using it is really, really important, just so that they can see these use cases and how it can be leveraged.
That's a really great point. Thank you, Miguel. And actually, if I can follow-up question for you.
Yeah.
When you're determining about the goal, sort of build it, buy it, some type of hybrid, what are the criteria and decisions of frameworks that organizations need to think through and how to get it up and running? How do they evaluate the trade-offs between in-house expertise, third-party? I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, as you start to go live, what are the different options of going live?
So there's definitely, I'll take my point of view, because I know this is like something that's continuously sort of updating almost on a daily basis, I feel. So there's definitely, like, the way I kind of see it is that the generative AI is still AI, and as probably people have worked in, I target mostly enterprise, but there's a lot of movement that needs to be, or sort of a base layer that needs to be there. Things like, your data lake, making sure your regulation is all in place, testing your models. All that stuff hasn't really gone away. From a machine learning perspective, in that sense, it's just another sort of machine learning technique, but that stuff needs to be there. So the same things that we were working on before with these problems still need to be addressed kind of moving forward.
Okay, great. Let's get into some trustworthy and ethics stuff. Don't worry, I've got some questions for you too. Beyond the technical aspects, we talked a lot about the technical barriers today. Can you talk a little bit about some of the social and cultural implications of bringing this in? All we're hearing about is job losses, and the middle class is going to be decimated. As we've talked about before, it's not quite that bad, but there are going to be some societal and challenges. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how we create trustworthy AI and the impact to society. It's a big question.
That's a big question, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely not a small answer, and every person that you asked to would have a different view. So maybe I'll pick on the trust aspect that you said. So how do we see organizations, and mainly so the clients that I'm working are right now geared towards the financial sector, the public sector, and insurance sector, and they see this as an opportunity, or probably Deloitte, we see this as an opportunity from a business competitive edge for organizations. And being a competitive edge within the marketplace or in the ecosystem that you are operating, you need to ensure that there is trust in everything that you're doing, not just for your customers, clients, shareholders, partners, but also within the organization. And I think you touched, rightly so, Stuart, on the job losses. So there is an aspect of the value that the organization can get in using such, emerging technology, but then the risks around that needs to be thought through as you are building, as you are scaling, as you are enabling your teams in using it. From Trustworthy AI perspective, we have seen a 6-dimensional or maybe a little bit more areas of risks that we see are now more and more talked about in this. So first one being fairness. Fairness, ethical, discrimination, like you name it, that's where it touches on. Are your technology tools that you're putting in the marketplace or in the customers that are going to be using it, is there an element of discrimination that's going to be, or perceived discrimination? Even perception can cause a reputational risk. So that's number one that needs to be thought through. Another one that's been talked about very broadly is around transparency. I am using a system which is giving me some decisions that your system thinks is good for me. Do I even know that I'm interacting with them? I think that's transparency. How does a common man knows that you are interacting with such kind of a technology? Like, it's simple enough because in a phone, you get the prompts on completing the sentences. It is so easy for us, we don't even know. And if I talk to my parents or my grandma, she's like, I didn't even realize that. So it's just a matter of now scaling it with different use cases. This is where I'm not impacted, I don't even care about it. But there are others, situations where I would care about that. The other one is around accountability. Where does this sit? And I'm not going to go through all because I believe over here, a lot of you already understand that. I'm touching on select, which I feel are really core where organizations can and should do something. Accountability, responsibility is one another one. We are using models which are built, pre-trained, and maybe it is coming from some of the organizations, and Anand over here and Miguel over here are training, and now we are putting it into your organization. Accountability, where does it sit? How should it be respected? You are relying on a vendor model. Is that just your organization, just the developer, data scientist who's building in, or is it also extended to the vendors that you are now partnering within the ecosystem? I think those are the kind of questions that are coming up. So how do you operate in an environment where you can build trust within the ecosystem is what I'm talking about. Now, when you extend that and you go to some of the repercussions that have happened. Recently, I was reading an article in the healthcare, and it's fresh in my mind, is like an instrument that diagnoses lung diseases is seen, and you can read that article, for white male, female individuals would be a different way that it is diagnosing the disease, but the rate for a black individual or with a color individual would be different. And that was an analysis done. So that's an ethical issue. And that's where, as a doctor, how are you going to rely on this technology to be able to trust the decisions that are coming? And do you want, as you're building this instrument, do you want to feed into the race component or not? Those are very important decisions that needs to be thought through as part of the design element. And I would just say trustworthiness, competitive edge starts with design development. And organizations definitely need to think this from the start, from the development lifecycle perspective, and not think about once the harm has happened. So that would be the social impacts that I would say that are pretty clear and eminent in the space that we are living in now.
That was a great summary. You should run for prime minister. Any other additions to that?
One thing I want to add is, like we're hardwired to trust algorithms, right? Like I think it's been shown in multiple studies that humans tend to defer to an automated system. Now that we have generative AI, and we all have interacted with these systems, everyone in this room, I'm assuming, and learned around the potential risks of hallucination. You've experienced it yourself. Even if we can reduce those risks to 0.1%, of every interaction, in a business context, there's still that 0.1% where it could have meaningful impact. So on the one side, we're trusting these algorithms, and on the other side, I would say there's competitive pressures to use them, right? So like enterprises entering a space now where, especially large enterprise, there's going to be a lot of legacy processes that they could be automating. And they're going to be competing with new entrants or startups that are from the ground up building automated companies with these models, right? And beyond that, governments are going to be competing. Think about the implications for defense, right? Like if we start leveraging these models in defense. Sure, we may have ethical boundaries, but what about the adversaries, right? What about countries abroad? So I think regulation is really the only way to kind of handle this. And I think we're in an unprecedented time where the regulators are kind of catching up now, right? So the technology is here, but the regulations have not caught up. So, yeah.
No, definitely. Regulation's always been a bit of a challenge for us. I would like to build a little bit on something you said around, getting user adoption, user behavior for the masses. I wonder, Anand, if you can talk a little bit about how we can leverage reinforcement learning algorithms, such as proximal policy optimization or soft actor critic, thank you, to effectively shape user behavior. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, how are we going to drive the behavior and the interactions we want with artificial intelligence out of, probably employees to start?
Yeah, so, I mean, reinforcement learning has been around for a while.
Yeah.
Like Facebook's algorithms that send you a random notification of someone is designed to get you back onto the app and using the app, right? Like reinforcement learning has been shaping human behavior for the past 10, 15 years, I would say, right? So all this news about fake news is because of reinforcement learning algorithms. I would say that the nuance with generative AI and reinforcement learning is it's being used to kind of bias the outputs of a generative model to interact better with humans, right? So, and what that really means is the ability of these models when deployed to in real time adjust their outputs, given their inputs. In real time being with every interaction that they have, and whenever they get feedback on that interaction, making an adjustment of the full model. So that the outputs themselves eventually become useful and helpful to that end customer. So I think reinforcement learning has a role. Soft actor critic and proximal policy optimization. These are just specific algorithms that can be used. I think OpenAI loves PPO. SAC is a good one. Multi-agent reinforcement learning is a thing too.
Yep.
And I think. Over time, it's really, these systems will be interfacing with humans, and that's where the reinforcement learning fits in. But at some point, these systems will also be interfacing with other AIs. And when you have AIs interfacing with other AIs, which is a logical next step in terms of how these things grow, we get into that multi-agent realm, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to unfold and the use of reinforcement learning in that context.
Okay, that's great. Any additions? I've got another question, but.
No, I think in my mind, I was just thinking of this whole idea of the AI talking to AI, and I think it's sort of an interesting idea, and I think it kind of goes to this kind of what I mentioned earlier, in that like the contact center chatbots are very easy to sort of understand, but I think there's just so much to it, and I think my background is more software engineering, so I kind of see everything as sort of software engineering lens, and I just think when people think of these systems, they just think of these one-shot prompts, but there's so much you can do with it if you were to extend it and apply sort of real software engineering application sort of rigor to it. The possibilities are just so much larger. If people have heard about chaining prompts and that, like there's such a world out there, and I think definitely like the next couple of years is going to be AIs talking to AI. So you won't have these APIs sort of speaking to each other. They would just be communicating in a language that maybe is much more efficient than something we would figure out, and they would just they would communicate with multiple conversations to each other. So it's almost chatbots speaking to chatbots. So Okay.
I have a little about that, which is like most platforms, like large enterprise platforms that exist today, like a Salesforce or whatever, their whole function is really to streamline human behavior, right? Like human process. They're there to ensure your employees follow a consistent process. They store the data associated to that and manage the business workflows associated to that. Now, I think the real existential threat for these platforms is these large general purpose models, right? When you get into multimodal learning and you get into larger models like the GPT-4s, the 5s, the GPT-9, if it ever comes out, at that point, the model can likely just interface with the data directly. it can create an application or really just an interface for a user on the fly that's personalized to that user's context. And it can also enforce a business rule, like a business function. And so at that point, you don't really need an enterprise platform, right? Most organizations, most enterprises are actually oriented or organized around their large tech platforms. So when you look at a bank in terms of their structure, they have an entire function that's oriented around their HR system or their accounting system. And that's because it's been typically easier to do that, because it's easier for the business to adapt to the technology than it is for the technology to adapt to the business. So in general, they start reorganizing and adapting that way. In the long term, as models get more general purpose and they automate more, I start to see this, this almost dilution of that, where the organization can finally start to focus on its real impact in market and rely on the model to kind of manage the data and interface as appropriate.
Did you have something to add, or no? Okay, just wasn't sure if that was a hand going up. I do have thank you very much. That was great. Anything to add, anybody? Because I would like to get back to the trustworthiness, ethical part of it. You talked earlier about the different races and countries getting different outputs from AI, and that's definitely a trend we're seeing in the market. Is how is it affecting it with the biases? We've talked about transparency and accountability, but I'm wondering, can you dig a little bit deeper into how Deloitte and how you work with your clients to actually put in tactical ways to create fairness, equality in the outcomes? Can you go a little bit deeper into it, please?
Yeah, I would say that the way that we are seeing organizations actually trying to make sure they are able to reap the benefits of the technology of Gen AI by making sure they have the right approaches and frameworks that are put in, and the right guardrails that are put in place. So the data scientists, the data engineers have the right platform to actually go do the things that they do best and not be stop-gated by some of the risk and repercussions that an organization needs to think about it because of the reputational risk it comes around with it. So maybe for you, if there are 2 or 3 things that I would say where you can start is putting some sound governance practices by leveraging your existing data governance, existing risk management practices into new motions. And why I say new motions is you will have to augment the traditional ways of how you were managing these risks. Your AI risk, or Gen AI now, with everything that we've listened and talked about, has a different scale in managing it. So your existing processes, your existing policies needs to be revamped to accommodate the changing landscape that you're working in. Where do you start? I have seen, and right now we are actually helping clients to build or develop AI policies which are augmenting Gen AI or the other technologies that are coming up. That policy needs to be having some sound standards which represent the value of the organization. How do you put them into operations or put them into execution is where organizations are right now failing, because you can have something in paper, but you just don't give your employees the avenue to how do I execute. I need the platform, but I also need some kind of well-defined guardrails where I know what to do and what not to do. Where can you start? Data governance, and I think Anand mentioned earlier on when he was talking about data governance practices are huge, because you are relying on the data for this model to be trustworthy, to be able to produce the outcome that you're expecting. Data governance is foundational. You cannot go wrong with that. You also need to make sure that the right governance approaches are fast-tracking or not stifling innovation, but allowing your developers to understand upfront or being proactive and understanding these risks. So what we are seeing organizations taking huge leap into this is using a risk-based analysis into your context, where this model is going to be applied, the business context, what data is going to be fed into it. So getting very good clarity on how this data is, what this model is going to be trained on. Is this data the right quality? Is it bringing the right kind of essence that you believe your customers, your organization needs? And last, to summarize it, would be your algorithm. So an easy algorithm would be that right now, regulatory bodies are still shaping up what they mean by this. Don't use neural nets into a way that it can, give you more fines than the benefit that you want. So if you just think about those three, think about the risks that it comes with, have your data practitioners as well your business owners come along and see the risks that you need to navigate and mitigate, and only focus on them. Because the risks can be massive, and you can just think about as many risks that you can think in your organization. But I think it's really the handful of risks, or maybe 2 or 3 risks that would be applicable for the use case that you have. So start with that and ensure that the deployment can happen. So how can you have this done is the concept of building machine learning operations, so ML ops. Now the talk is about LLM ops because of all the Gen AI stuff that we're talking about, right? So jokes on the side, but it's really putting it into the wheels, making sure your processes are executable. You allow your practitioners with the right tools, technology to actually execute on them. And I think that's the magic wand, that can really help you fast track your implementation journey.
So we're coming up to the end. I'm going to turn it to the audience in a second for questions, but quickly, rapid fire, 20 seconds or less. What are you most excited about that's coming down the horizon? What's next? What's the thing that's actually making you, hey, the good news? Let's leave on a positive note. Anand, what's the most popular thing coming down the next couple of years?
Well, I think the focus and emphasis on general purpose models.
Okay.
It's not AGI because that's a moving target, right? But I would say that just being able to interface with a model, I'm super excited about Copilot from Microsoft actually being released. And sorry, I took that from you probably. Because I want to see the impact on our work firsthand. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Miguel?
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see kind of where people kind of take it, I guess, like seeing all these use cases. But I do agree, just having this like AI assistant, I think just sounds so awesome in so many ways. I know, like we said, don't focus on the negative part, but just the positive parts. Like, wow, that would be amazing. And maybe the second thing, just to add a little bit more, is just like this idea that like there's so much personalized content you can create so quickly. Like I think there's lots of negatives to it, but just almost creating your own reality and just saying, I'd like to take the ceiling off of this room, boom, like done, like that. Like how cool would that be, and the possibilities. So.
I would just say that, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So what's to come is amazing. And just thinking about where our generations are going to be when they are going to use this as part of their living just blows me away. And I just want to be there to be able to enjoy and see that.
Yeah, in our rocking chairs many years from now. Any questions from the audience? If you just put your hand up nice and high over here. There's a microphone, or speak loud.
Yeah, I just want to know what does Deloitte recommend in terms of how AI risk is supposed to be managed? Is it better to disperse AI risks across the other risks in a company's risk taxonomy? For example, consider AI risk as part of data risk or third-party risk or privacy risk, for example, or is it recommended to treat AI risk as its own separate entity in a risk taxonomy?
Maybe I can take that as I'm right now helping a US client as well as one of the tier 1 banks over here. What the best way to leverage that is use your existing, like short answer, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Your organization already has, and most of the organizations already has invested a lot of risk management practices in it. The risks, if you think about from this technology now, is not too far away. It's more augmented, or it has a different scale or the problem that you were traditionally solving for. So privacy, you already have privacy risk as a key or tier 1 risk in the organization. Just augment with how would you manage, how would you navigate when the risks around privacy are seen from consent perspective or from AI perspective, like when the models are using your information and data. Technology risk. Technology risk is also something that now the second line or risk practitioners are augmenting their risk portfolio or their risk and controls. how to manage the AI type of risks. So it's again augmenting there. Where we are seeing you need to augment with not net new is fairness. So fairness was not seen in the same way as it is now. And traditionally, all the model developers were using fairness, transparency as part of their day-to-day, but the deliberate attempt to navigate and mitigate the risk is now coming to light. So in the analysis, and I'll just leave this thought with you, in the organization that we were helping, we assessed all of their risk framework, their entire risk framework. What do they have, what is missing? And there was literally, from the enhancement that needs to be done across on all fronts, including vendor, and you mentioned that, there were 3 that came about that they were not doing a good job. Data was one of them, which they already had, so data governance, data risk was critical, but fairness, transparency, and vendor management were the 3 that were really seen as they are not doing a good job in managing them, and that needs to be augmented. So I would say start with what you have, augment it, and then move with this changing landscape, because these risks are changing, and with LLMs, it's also expanding. So you may have to fine tune. So make it flexible enough, but leverage what you have.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have another talk starting in about 2 minutes. Next year, we'll make Deloitte a whole day. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, everybody.